Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news. Hey Scott, how's it going?
Hey, Crystal. Okay, so you're over in Carson City, right?
I am. I'm so sorry I could not be with you today. You're in Elko, right?
Yeah, we're over here. I had to stay in Elko this week simply because we've got so much going on. We had a new Mormon temple open this week here in Elko. It's only the third Mormon temple in the state, and the
The
governor was
governor came to that, right?
right. Yeah, he was out here yesterday for the opening, and they're starting to do public tours before they dedicate it for religious use in early October. And then we got the fair parade tomorrow, so we have the lieutenant governor with us. He's going to be riding in a horse and buggy carriage driven by one of our county commissioners.
That's fun. I think Winnemucca, I got to be back there tomorrow for our Tri-County Fair and a bunch of other stuff we're putting together. I was actually at the governor's mansion last weekend.
Oh
And
yeah,
it sort of like the Lincoln Day dinners that all the different counties do to do a fundraiser. They have a barbecue during the summertime, and I mean, the Carson City Republican group. Fantastic group. They're so much fun. Michael McDonald was there, and anytime he shows up at these events, he has usually a very passionate speech to give, and we're all like wondering what the topic's going to be. But last weekend, I heard a much more coherent, strategic Michael McDonald, and I was excited to see that
oh
he
good.
kind of toned it down again. He's getting his maybe warpath posture going on, but very successful event. And I'm actually going back to the Carson City meeting later tonight, which is why I'm here.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course the big news, we're both going to be down in Vegas over the next couple weeks at various events.
Yeah,
So
there's a big national organization that is hyper focused on Nevada and setting up an organization in every county in the state. I'm not going to talk about who they are just yet because we're still in the structure of trying to figure out how this organization is going to influence politics in Nevada. But I think somewhere in the next episode or two, we should be able to tell people what's going on with that group. So exciting stuff. And what are we
right.
doing at Nevada Republican Club?
Yeah, we're going to be down at the Nevada Republican Club meeting on Tuesday, September 2nd. Again, Lieutenant Governor speaking at that, but we're going down to have some other discussions. And of course, the big news for any of our 775 Alive fans is on September 10th, Las Vegas Conservative Town Hall Discussion Group has invited us in to talk about bridging this sort of gap between rural and urban Nevada and opening up discussions there. So that's going to be September 10th. Down at the Red Lobster there on South Durango in Las Vegas. You can go to lctvg.org and get some more details. But yeah, looking forward to that. And
That's a good
of
point.
course,
It's a lot of pressure, actually. I'm kind of like where the rurals in Las Vegas representing the rurals. I hope we leave a good impression.
oh, I think we will. And again, part of the thing we've been doing here is, of course, talking about not only bridging that gap between rurals and urbans, but identifying some of the issues where even though we might agree philosophically, there's some structural differences.
Yeah.
And one that has come back out that we really wanted to focus on today, and it's probably a bit of irony we're doing this remotely, is the question of mail-in ballots.
I guess I didn't think of that. I guess that is pretty ironic. Yeah.
Right. And of course, President Trump recently has issued a sort of executive order looking for ways to get in and mail in ballots. We've had another go around in Pennsylvania courts about, whether the inability to correctly fill out the paperwork on the outside of the envelope on mail-in ballots invalidates them. So mail-in ballots are now once again top of the focus.
Yeah, and our podcast, the 775 Alive podcast, our goal is I know everyone's super busy. That's the one cool thing about especially rurals is we all got super cool lives that we're all busy doing. So we actually try to look at things from the national level and then really articulate what it's going to look like here in Nevada. So I wanted to start this conversation, if we could, with mail-in ballot history and how this has kind of gone as a trajectory. I like to look at graphs over time and dissect it. So I was going to quickly go over how mail-in ballots sort of proliferated here, and then I have a question for you, Scott, that
Okay.
something really struck me in these numbers that I'm not sure. I think part of this is Trump, but I'm excited to hear what you have to think about this. So 1980s is when California instituted a no excuse absentee ballot, which basically opened up mail-in balloting to everybody in the state of California. Since then, 28 states have become mail-in voting states, plus DC. So I guess 29, however you want to.
Mhm.
I don't know how we feel about DC. I guess it's cleaner now, right?
Well, that's what it's sounding
Everything's
like.
cleaned up.
Yep.
So what I found interesting was from 2016 to 2020, I can't remember who was in office. Do you remember?
Yep.
Okay,
President
so
Trump.
under the Trump administration, mail-in voting doubled.
Hmm.
So by 2020, 43% of the American population did mail-in voting. Now here's where it gets interesting. 2024, after Trump spent a lot of time suing different districts to try to actually audit these voting processes, that number jumped from 43% down to 30. So we had a big drop in mail-in voting. And so, as you were saying earlier, Trump's taking more action. So we're going to maybe see a further decline in that number.
Well, and I think there's a couple things if I could fill in before we get to your question, because I think one of the things that's complicating this issue nationwide is what exactly we mean, right? So you quoted California starting with no excuse mail ballots.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was the term.
Yeah, well, no, and that's a widely used term. What a no excuse mail ballot is an idea that you don't have to come in and say, I'm not going to be available to physically vote in person. So traditionally, you had to show up in person to vote, unless you had, a definite medical excuse. You could prove you were traveling, you were in the military, and then this absentee ballot idea comes in. What we
Yeah,
call mail-in ballot now, absentee is much better. Um, what started happening is we saw in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of concern on the Democratic side that Republicans seemed to be encouraging in places like Georgia, where I lived at the time, encouraging their members to get absentee ballots. And the
yeah.
argument is by requesting absentee ballots, it made it easier for those people to vote. They didn't have to drive somewhere, they didn't have to stand in line. There was no concerns about weather, which,
Yeah, kind of more of like a rural issue. Like it's you want to help them if they maybe can't drive 70, like for McDermott, 70 miles to Winnemucca. That's a
yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, well, there's two different things. So even before we get into the rural divide, the argument that had been made since the early 2000s among Democrats is that this was a technique Republicans were using in the suburbs
okay.
to sort of bolster up their count. So that's when you started seeing states introduce not just absentee ballots where you had to justify, but these no excuse ballots, right? Where you could just go in and have a ballot sent to you, right? No questions asked, which is actually how a lot of states do that.
Right.
Now, that 2016 to 2020 actually covers a separate period, which is hugely important, right? And one that accelerated. The state started experimenting not with no excuse ballots, because again, with no excuse ballots, you had to go request a ballot. What they started actually doing is universal mail ballots. Now, there's only 8 states that actually do this, but the idea is anybody that's a registered voter automatically gets sent a ballot, right? You have to specifically tell the election authorities you don't want a ballot not to get a mail ballot. That's different under the no excuse mail ballots where you had to request it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And um,
I think
so
politically
that's
that does make a difference. Like customer engagement is everything, right? And that's one of
Mhm.
the things that I've begun to learn about the downside of mail-in voting. For me, we've covered this in past episodes. I grew up in a state where everyone voted by mail and it was a celebrated thing. And then when I came to Nevada and saw people's enthusiasm for voting in person, it was a really eye-opening experience. And I wouldn't have it any other way at this point because there's such a it's such a good thing to make a sacrifice to go out and vote. It's much more meaningful than dropping it in a
Mhm.
mailbox.
Right. But although you did bring up an interesting point, is that there are some dynamics, particularly for rural communities, and that's one of the things in thinking about these presentations we're going to be doing about bridging this rural-urban divide. I think is vitally important because in Nevada there are a number of precincts. Elko County has had 12, although two of them just this last election have reopened up in-person voting locations. But Elko County has, since the mid 90s, 1990s, 12 precincts where the population was so small or so dispersed that they only got their ballots by mail,
Right.
right? That was sort of another version of the universal mail-in ballot. Now, granted, at that time, before January 2020 in Nevada, you had to physically go register to vote. Now we have an automatic voter registration system, which is one of the issues we need to talk about here. But
Yeah. And
when you
I do,
register to
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I
Uh,
do want to talk a little bit about how Nevada got into a place with it having mail-in voting,
oh,
which is it's kind of interesting how it got that legislation got birthed here in Nevada, sort of under stressful,
mhm,
different, circumstances. I know in 2020, Sisolak declared an emergency, right?
mhm.
And that's where they introduced, what was it, AB3 or AB4, I think, which
Well, wait a minute.
around mail-in voting,
All right.
right?
Yeah, there's two stages to that process. So the emergency
Right.
wasn't about mail-in voting. The emergency was about the COVID epidemic,
Yeah.
right? And like a lot of other states, Nevada there for that election, certainly well, they tried to institute it by the primary, but certainly by the November election instituted universal mail ballots. Everybody was supposed to vote by mail.
Right.
The the legislative thing came at a session in 2021 where they took that emergency order and then enshrined it into Nevada law.
Yeah, I think that was
Right.
AB321.
Right.
I remember.
And that's where we are now.
Right.
Um, so you're right. It started as an emergency provision, but it operates now because the legislature votes on it. Now, granted, it was a
Right.
legislature that is heavily gerrymandered, as we were talking about a couple
Right.
episodes ago. But it is Nevada law as it stands right now.
So there's a lot of contention in Nevada around mail-in voting, and it seems like you're saying that it's a good thing for rural areas. Is there a downside? What is the contention? Why are people upset about this measure?
Oh boy, there's another one of your 40-part questions, right? Well,
Mhm.
let's
Because it
take
is sounding like you're describing to me that this is a great thing for rural areas, and I don't disagree, but there is a ton of people very upset about it, and
oh yeah.
I understand it a little bit better.
Well, so there's actually I think a couple dimensions to this that are separate, and maybe we'll come back to the rural because the again there's a lot of places in rural Nevada that now have more than a generation's experience with this universal mail balloting, right? So this isn't as new as it is in some of the more urban parts of the state. So the fundamental problem is people don't trust it on the fact that nobody's really sure who's voting these ballots in, right? Um, in the case where you had to request a mail ballot, and I'll point out, I mentioned 8 states use universal mail balloting, and it's very, very interesting that out of those 8 states, there's only one that's located on the East Coast, and
Yeah.
that is Vermont. All
Well,
the other, yeah, all the other universal mail-in states are out west, right?
yeah.
So Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii, right? It's very interesting. That's a Western dynamic. Now, there's other states, you mentioned the 28, that have no excuse ballots, but you, again, have to go request those. The problem with this is so,
Is it voter fraud? Is that the main centerpiece to the frustration and anger?
yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. There's real concerns. Nobody knows who's actually filling out these ballots. A
Right.
lot of people don't feel like there's real security in them. Right now, we have stuff where they got to sign the envelope and stuff like that, and they're supposed to be matched and signed properly. But again, these Pennsylvania lawsuits are based on the fact that somebody doesn't fill in the date right. Does that invalidate the ballot? Right,
Right.
and not to mention, there's also the thing that to allow those mail ballots. So, for instance, one of the things that a lot of people are concerned about is like Elko County, all of our mail goes to Salt Lake. So our mail ballots actually leave the state and then get sent back in,
Right.
which a lot of people think is fishy. We had the big thing where they were going to try to shut down Reno's mail sorting center and transfer it to California, and that really upset a lot of people. And
Yeah.
mail ballots was part of it. But the other side of the coin, also on that, not being able to guarantee who they are, is this is also mixed with stuff such as ballot harvesting, right? That all of a sudden we're seeing more of this. There's a big case up in Michigan. Is it Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota? One of the places where they had these 3 guys on the city council that were caught on video, stuffing the mail drop boxes. Right.
Yeah.
Allegedly, I should say. They haven't gotten the trial yet, but they're under indictment for allegedly stuffing the ballots.
Right.
Um,
And it does seem like, just from a common sense perspective, it seems like it would be more of an urban issue than a rural issue, just because we are so sparsely populated. Say like Humboldt County has 20,000 people in there, and if all of a sudden you got 30,000 ballots from Humboldt County, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that something is fishy going on there. But in a city, there's millions of people, you can plus or minus 100,000, so I would think it would be more of an urban issue. And so, but essentially what we're talking about is going from a universal mail-in ballot system where you're automatically sent a ballot if you're registered, to a system where you have to opt in to the
right.
mail. That's all we're asking for, right?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the best system, but I think there's some
Yeah.
more stuff we can unpack here
Okay.
uh, on the fraud issue because I don't think it's as clear cut as that. So first of all, the rural versus urban divide, you're partially right, but the key thing to remember is that a lot of recent elections in Nevada have been decided by a relatively small number of votes, right?
Right.
So we're not talking. This is not something that would have to necessarily require a shift of like 120,000 votes in some place like Las Vegas. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
and actually, I heard the stat just the other day, so I remember it. Trump won Nevada by 50.59.
right. Yeah.
0.6% over 50%. So
Right.
that's how close it is.
Right. And and that's been the concern is that these mail ballots uh could, if they're fraudulent, actually provide margins that narrow,
Yeah,
right? Now, whether it is, this is one of the counter arguments against the fraud case. Well, it's never been proven. Well, yes and no. Again, that case I was just talking about, and I'm pretty sure it is in Minnesota. The more I think about it, but that case, these three people on the city council were definitely that would have swayed those elections.
yeah,
Um, but some of the stuff that leads people to this is a people get mail ballots from people who no longer live at that address, right? Which indicates that the voter registration data is out of date at the very least,
yeah,
right? Even before we get into this. But I know one of the things we looked at in Elko during the primary election, and we had just over half of the voters use mail ballots in the primary election. I'll get to why that's significant. 2024 primary here in a minute. Um, but um, even though 50% of the people who turned out, we had abysmal turnout for that primary election. It was
yeah.
about 30%, right?
Mhm.
When we ran the numbers, of course, I was a poll worker at the time, but I was also doing some work for my article series and for the Republican Party. About 73% of the mail ballots that got sent out automatically, we don't know what happened to them. They weren't surrendered when people voted, and they weren't voted.
Yeah,
So almost three-quarters of those mail ballots just disappeared, more than likely thrown out as junk mail,
yeah,
right? But that's why people don't trust this. I mean, you have a hugely expensive operation um, and an absurdly run population. If we remember just last legislative session, one of the big bills that got passed was the legislature had to pass a bill ordering counties to send out the sample ballots before they send out the real ballots,
yeah.
which is absolutely absurd. Why wouldn't you do that anyway, right? But it's an example of how sort of hodgepodge the system was put in. But
Well,
when
and we're seeing a lot of effects in our culture and in our country that is kind of politicized, and it gives you some weird perspectives on things. And one of the things I think we saw in the 2024 election was common sense prevailing. And the
Mhm.
funny thing about common sense is it's sometimes very difficult to back up with actual numbers. But when I started out this episode by talking about the voter registration increases over time, and you see a big spike during the Trump administration, and then you see Biden win by an unprecedented amount of population. And then you have all these voter audits, and you have people cleaning up their voter rolls. And then all of a sudden in 2024, it's dropped down to 30%. Now, common sense kind of operates with aggregate data, so, getting to the heart of why people are upset about mail-in voting, I mean, I had never I didn't really buy into it. I've always heard it, like people were convinced that there's voter fraud, but like you said, it's really hard to point to numbers and facts and times and places where it might have taken place. So even if I did feel like it happened, it's not provable. So it's always been an issue I kind of just ignored because I like productive things. But the night of Donald Trump's election in 2024, when a Republican had won the popular vote for the first time in 20 years, that opened my eyes, and I was happy because I wanted Trump to win, but I'd say about an hour later I started to get a weird like maybe not even an hour later, maybe like a half an hour later I started to think, how is it possible a Republican won the popular vote for the first time in 20 years? I know Trump's an excellent candidate and he knows how to rally the vote, but with Biden winning as much as he did in 2020, that kind of a swing seems odd. But then you think about from 2020 to 2024, a lot of voter rolls got audited and
Mhm.
cleaned up. And so you start to think that a lot of votes were being cast that shouldn't have been cast.
Well, yeah, and
Mail-in voting stuff.
right, and a lot of people think that, but again, it's sort of hard to prove, and I'm not sure we actually have a good handle. I will say before we address specifically, because I think there is an alternative explanation on the mail ballots.
Yeah.
Uh, but just before we get to that, one of the things people pointed out is there's about 6 to 7 million less Democratic voters
Yeah.
uh, in 2024 versus 2020, and a lot of people take that as de facto evidence that there was fraud in 2020. Um, Between the 1992 and 1996 election, there was 8 million voters lost, almost predominantly on what would have been the Republican side. Uh,
Yeah.
Most of those were probably Ross Perot voters who were disappointed and couldn't cast a vote for Bob Dole. Um, what I'm trying to say there is that the number alone doesn't necessarily indicate anything. But
Yeah, and I appreciate this has happened more than once in history, but it's coincident to a massive audit of voter rolls. And you might say either the Democrats didn't turn out or they were like either dead people that people were turning in ballots for, or like that type of voter fraud is like, hey, these people weren't supposed to be on the voter roll, so we got rid of them. That number could have been from that voter roll audit across
well,
the.
it could have been, but I'm not seeing evidence on that. I'm more inclined to think either we had voters jump sides,
Okay.
right? Which there seems to be some at least fairly solid information that it might have been enough to impact those Democratic votes.
That's the
But give
best prognosis for the patient. I like it.
right.
Yeah.
Well, but on mail ballots, I think there's an alternative explanation, right? So on the mail-in ballots, we've dropped from 44 or whatever 40 some percent nationwide down into the 30s between 2020 and 2024. And again, it's not just COVID's over, but on the Republican side, there were a lot of Republicans and a lot of nonpartisans who actually um, didn't want to vote by mail at all, right? They showed up to vote in person. And
Yeah.
in a lot of these areas, so Elko, where Trump wins 70 some percent of the vote, I mean, we were slammed all during the election. We being the poll workers. I mean, we had a steady stream of people, and we actually on these traditional rural mail-in only precincts, the number of people in those precincts who voted by mail actually dropped,
Mhm.
right? Even though turnout level was still very high, right? They came and voted in person. They drove into town to vote because they
Yeah.
didn't trust the mail-in ballots that they'd been using for more than a generation. So I
Well,
think,
the media has really flooded the zone on the like I keep repeating that the audits all over. There was, every county almost had to go through their voter rolls. So, I mean, it's something we've all been thinking about and appreciate. Actually, I like that it wound up with more people getting out to vote because it really does make you value your vote and make sure
mhm.
that it's an integrous system.
Well, there's certainly something true to that. We're also starting to see, I think, also some interest. I mentioned that we'd had traditionally going back to the early 2000s, we had 12 votes that or 12 precincts that voted predominantly by mail, right?
Yeah.
Two of those shifted this election. One is the town of Jackpot, which is on the Nevada Idaho border going up towards Twin Falls. They're in the process of sort of trying to get incorporated town or their incorporated town, but become an incorporated city. So having that in-person voting precinct is part of a different sort of process,
Are
right?
they actually going to be successful, do you think?
Well, it's going to depend if they can get the housing up. They're one of these
Yeah,
areas. This is a digression, but they're one of these areas that got really hit hard by the 2020 census being taken during COVID
yeah,
because a lot of their population who works in the casinos and some of the entertainment things up there darted back up to Twin Falls to pick up work during
yeah.
COVID. They thought they were going to increase that threshold of population in 2020, but they're working now. But the other one was what's known as Precinct 29, which is the Nevada portion of the Duck Valley Reservation, the Shoshone Paiute Reservation up there on the border.
Yeah, I
And
don't.
mail-in ballots, this is an interesting case because one of the areas that the claim is that mail-in ballots are needed is Native American reservations. But there's real problems. And actually, one of the things the Biden administration did, there was a big, the White House put out this interagency report in 2021 looking at voting access on the reservations, which is a very interesting read. So the problems are one, Native Americans have been voting in very small numbers, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them definitely is access, right? And that access isn't necessarily solved by mail ballots because a lot of reservations don't have standardized addresses. This is one of
Oh,
the things that actually complicates the census, right? They don't have like the type of plat maps that you might find in regular communities. So there's no way for somebody to give an accurate address to get the mail delivered to them,
interesting.
right? And they tend to be located like Duck Valley is. Duck Valley's about, oh, right at 2 hours north of Elko, a little over 90 miles. The 2 hours comes from you got to weed through Whitehorse Canyon. But, they're isolated. And, so to vote, they'd have to drive 2 hours in. There's a couple other reservations like that. And starting in 2016, right? A couple of these, the Walker River Paiute tribe down in Mineral County, and then the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe up there, sort of northeast there of Reno. Both of them sued to have polling locations put on the reservation, right?
Okay.
And Duck Valley's done that as well. And there's been a lot of effort to do that. But
There's,
it's
I mean, obviously mail-in voting has its value. I particularly value it in the rural areas because I do know like at least half of McDermott, which is a place I know intimately, doesn't really have a car or they'd have to organize transportation. It's really hard to get somewhere. So mail-in voting definitely has its place. But what we're ultimately talking about here is, do we want universal mail-in ballot where everyone that's registered gets a ballot whether they want one or not, which is really lends itself to fraud, right? Or do we want a system where our registered voters can opt in to a mail-in ballot? And
well, let,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say again, we got to make a distinction there, right? Because the idea of getting a mail-in ballot, if you want it, is that no excuse balloting. What
Okay,
we're talking about in Nevada is everybody gets it automatically
right.
unless you specifically opt out. That I think has people more concerned than anything else. Uh,
Absolutely.
because that it's not even the voter acted fraudulently, right? It's
Uh-huh.
just all of a sudden I might be sitting, and again, these sample ballots caused problems last time. People were coming, I got 4 ballots at my house, that indicates fraud. Well, you got 4 ballots because you have 2 voters and there's 2 sample ballots and 2 real ballots, and they're not doing a good enough job separating what these look like. But
So
that
ultimately, though, for Nevada, like it just, ooh, I don't like the way this came into law because it feels
Mhm.
like a little bit like something snuck in that shouldn't have snuck in.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, we had this emergency, we had mail-in voting for 2020, and then the next year the legislature went ahead and codified it. And now to undo that or to change it, amend it, we would have to do that through the legislature, which is
Right, which
almost supermajority Democrat.
well,
So
and that
for the foreseeable future, this is we're stuck with this.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we are going to be stuck with it, barring some sort of federal intervention, and I'm not sure how accurate or how possible that is.
Yeah,
But
that is that is another thing I wanted to ask you about. I know Trump is trying to do something about mail-in voting, but I think voting is one of those things that lies firmly within the state's rights. If I'm not mistaken, it's really something that has to be done state by state, which kind of limits how much Trump can do. I don't know that there's an executive order that could really touch this.
well, there wouldn't be an executive order that could
Right.
really touch this. I
It
mean,
has to be
that's
Congress, if anything.
well, it'd have to be Congress, and it would in some ways and I'm being hesitant because this is actually a complex issue because you're
Yeah,
absolutely right. According to the Constitution, how voting is organized is a state's issue. The problem is we've already got a whole body of federal law in the Voter Rights Act, which is embedded under the 14th and 15th Amendments, that have modified state election laws
yeah.
under the Equal Protection Clause. And if anything happens at the federal level, that's what it's going to be nestled under. It's going to be an argument. Look, you're
Rights
saying,
issues, right? I was reading that Congress could act if there was a civil rights issue or access to voting issue.
well, they could. Access to voting is one of the things that's driving this, which we could talk about
Yeah,
in a minute. But one of the problems with this has been, um, how do you show that this disparately impacts somebody else? So we've had a number of lawsuits, again, going back to this Pennsylvania case, where they're saying, look, we've got these ballots, and one of the problems with mail-in voting is they don't have to be completed by election day. Or I mean, California
yeah.
has what? It's like almost a month after the election, they could still take mail ballots. And one
Mhm.
of the arguments is, doesn't this just create an opportunity for somebody who didn't vote on election day, not be happy with the results, and then send in their mail ballot afterwards? I mean, it's really bizarre. But in that Pennsylvania case, if he argued, look, we have an election day. The state law says the winner should be announced within whatever 5 days after election day, right? 10 days. Um, and we now have a legislature that has extended that deadline past it. That becomes sort of a violation of civil rights, and
Yeah.
that could trigger a federal response. You're right, it has to be done state by state. It'd be very hard to see how you could do a federal law on this.
Yeah,
uh,
I didn't think about that angle. That's actually a really astute observation. It does hurt the rest of the country to kind of sit and wait for a few states to figure it out. It's kind of disruptive, not only to us personally and our culturally, but often you see the stock market react to
right.
elections and having it drawn out for several weeks. That may be a place where the federal government stays up, can step in and say, hey, we need results by 3 days after the close of polls or something like that.
Right.
That definitely impacts other states when they don't. Like,
Yeah, and that's one of the big issues. And again, I think one of the things it does is actually the universal mail ballots, I think, are undermining faith in the election
mhm,
generally. Um, and let's go back to this access question because we didn't really talk about that, although outside the rural context, but there is an interesting dimension to this, right?
mhm.
Um, so one of the arguments is that what mail-in balloting does is it increases the availability of people to vote. Um, and some of the arguments about this are interesting and potentially valid. Some of them are not. So a great example that gets thrown out a lot of times, well, if you get rid of mail balloting, you don't want service members serving overseas to vote. They've got a system set up for that has nothing to do with mail balloting.
It's been set
And
up for over 100 years, by the way.
yeah, right. And I mean that's not, and nowadays it's not even mail. It's a system, well, in Nevada it's called EASE. It's an electronic voting
Mhm.
system. But even more importantly, you hear these arguments. We talked about tribal communities. Interestingly, tribal communities before 2021 were often targeted as places where mail ballots was the way to solve the problem. Now they're going the other way, right? The claim being they're not, this is interesting, that the native reservations aren't voting in the same percentage as the rest of the population because they can only vote by mail, right? They would vote more if they had a place to go to in person. That's a large part of the conclusion about these lawsuits and putting polling places on reservations. Now, there could be an argument again that recreating that civic experience of being together in a community and voting might encourage people to vote. Um,
Okay.
but it is interesting is that a lot of these access arguments are actually based on, from the Democratic side, tend to be based on this idea that if each segment of the population, however you divide that up, and usually right now we're in a thing where it's usually race or ethnicity, uh, if they're not voting at the same level as everybody else, or not voting at the same level as whites, the problem must be that there's structural barriers to access,
Yeah.
right?
At its
And
most foundational level, there is a percentage of people who vote, and there's a percentage of people who don't. And there's a bunch of theories as to why the people who don't vote, right?
right,
So the
and then
predominant theory has been, well, access. It's just too hard to vote for some of these people, which is why we produce the mail-in ballots with hopes that more people would turn out to vote.
And again, really this issue with mail ballots, we're only about just over two full election cycles through this. So, but it was interesting looking at the 2024 election. So in Nevada, about 45% of all votes submitted in the 2024 general election were by mail. So less than half, right? Um, in Washoe County, right, Reno, um,
Who was the highest? Who was the lowest?
okay, let's go with that. So,
Let's say
so
who was the most patriotic? Who all?
well, it's not
Mineral
patriotic.
County?
That well, yeah, Mineral County actually had the lowest mail-in vote percentage, about
Right.
33%,
The highest
right?
in-person voting, Mineral County, you are our hero for today.
Right. Um, Douglas County actually had the highest mail-in percentage, about
Mhm.
63%, right?
Yeah.
So one third of Mineral, almost two-thirds in Douglas. And Douglas is an interesting case because another group that frequently gets brought into this debate is elderly or retired people. They can't get out the vote, right? So they need to mail in ballot. Douglas is one of our older counties, not our oldest, right? Actually, Esmeralda is significantly older. But Nye County had a high percentage, which makes sense because it's rural. But if you look at the counties that were sort of had the least number of mail-in ballots, they were almost predominantly rural counties that went strongly towards Trump. The more urban counties were the ones that took advantage of mail-in. And this is one of the interesting arguments that's emerging because part of the argument for mail-in ballots is this is going to bring in more people to vote. This is going to allow more people to vote. There's a very real discussion. So the Nevada Independent did an article where they think we are seeing some new voters come out of Clark County, Las Vegas using mail-in ballots. Again, urban areas where really, you have access to public transportation, you have polling places relatively accessible, right? Why are they doing mail-in ballots, right? To the same extent, but rural counties not. But another part of
Do you think
that
it's a
is that
safety thing? I was thinking in my mind, I feel completely safe in Humboldt County, but if I had to go vote in person in Las Vegas, I would be a little hesitant.
yeah, I don't know if I don't know if I'd think that way. We've had very few,
Yeah.
point of almost no incidences of any note anywhere in Nevada. I'm not sure safety's really the
Well,
concern.
perception of safety, anyways, from a female perspective, like Las Vegas is huge and it's a bunch of people I don't know. Whereas Humboldt County, it's a good chance I know every other person in line with me,
Right.
So I feel like that does make a difference to some urbanites.
Well, it very well could. But again, is mail-in ballots the best way to solve an issue that really stems from elsewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And this goes back to the structural barriers. Through some of my writing, I'm in my mind the greatest predictor of who votes is age, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that some of those counties, Elko and Humboldt, as we keep saying, are the youngest counties in Nevada, and they had some of the lowest percentage of mail-in ballots. Make of that what you will, right? That's very, very unusual to sort of see if mail-in ballots either encourages young people to vote, right? But a better example might be primaries, because one of the things that's happened is again, mail ballots come in due to COVID emergency, but they follow closely on the heels of automatic voter registration, another opt-out process instituted through the DMV. That was passed before COVID, goes into effect January 2020. So at the same time, mail-in balloting becomes an option. We have a dramatic increase in Nevada's voter rolls because now you go update your address or get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote unless you tell them don't register me.
Yeah.
But if you look at primary election participation has dropped. The key thing is, when we look at Nevada's primary election percentage, the use of mail in ballots is significantly higher. And what that seems to indicate, Chuck Muth and others have argued, is that what mail in balloting is doing is not bringing in new voters. It's not reducing a barrier for new voters. It's providing a more convenient way for people who are already going to vote to vote.
Yeah,
What's going on?
primary's a little bit different. They definitely are the most informed of us going out there. But to be honest, when I talk to the public and throughout my campaign last year and different venues, you'd be surprised how many people do not know what a primary is.
Oh yeah, no, that doesn't.
So that was a big part to deal with the low turnout is most of them are like, what's a primary? And I'm like, oh,
Right. Um, and that gets back to the point is that an interesting question in this is that, you know, if mail ballots aren't solving the access issue in the sense of bringing in new voters or people who normally wouldn't vote, is it worth the frustration and the loss of faith within the electoral system to keep doing it?
yeah.
And this gets into some questions. There's a lot flowing back now about what other countries use mail ballots, and most countries don't. France, I know, did a brief experiment with them in the 70s and decided they were just too risky. Now, France, you can go get an absentee mail ballot, but again, you have to go in to the
Up in.
mairie, to the town hall, opt
Yep.
in, fill out forms, and not to mention the fact that I think there's enough structural differences between the French and American political systems where it's probably not the best comparison. But most European countries actually do not use mail ballots unless you have very specific reasons and engage with the authorities beforehand. And again, you're absolutely right that we have a process that was instilled in many areas or expanded dramatically because of a COVID emergency that is now being argued as sort of the natural or preferred or where we should be going.
I do think maybe, I'm not sure how much the federal government allots to states, counties, and cities to administer election stuff. But if there's a large chunk of money from the federal government that goes to states to print mail-in ballots, I suppose that's a place where Trump could go in and retract those funds. That would be significant.
Yeah, that I'd have to look at. Now, there is a dynamic is there were grants that installed a lot of those electronic voting machines that a lot of people are unhappy with now, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I know in most counties in Nevada, the Trump did issue an executive order that people had to have a paper printout now of what they vote.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things that caused is Elko County had to dump about.
Literally get a receipt.
Right. And that actually it ended up costing Elko County's gonna have to shell out about another $100,000 to get new printers for the machines they're using to
Yeah.
allow that. So and there's no federal money for that. You have a federal mandate that the counties just have to pick up.
Okay,
And
yeah, because I was thinking that is like a principal piece of mail-in voting proliferating is like, it's so tremendously expensive to print things and mail them, and wherever that
right.
funding comes from, I'm like, that's a place on the federal level that may be a place where Trump can do something about this. I know he can't really do anything legislatively, but pulling funding really does do a nice little push in the right direction.
Right, and pulling highway funding, the power of the purse. But more significantly on this issue, I'm not really sure there's going to be an easy way out of it. I do find it very interesting that universal mail ballots, which I think are the real problem,
Yeah.
right? I think at the end of the day, just blanket sending out mail ballots, election ballots, the same way you send out, sales at the grocery store is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
Um, but I think they're going to have some more discussions about the mail ballots, about the deadline. Should we move to a true election day, or at least an election period that ends on election day, not 2, 3, 4, 5,
Mhm.
5 days, 8 weeks later, or whatever it is.
Well,
Um,
what I do like about what Nevada does, and this is something we all did in Humboldt County. I don't know if they did it over in Elko, but everyone went on to the Secretary of State's website and was able to pull up their vote and see that it was received. I
right.
think that's a very neat thing. That goes a long way to preventing voter fraud because you can actually see if your vote's being counted or not. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be a huge debate, and again, this is something I think that's really interesting in terms of, um, we're not only are rural areas and urban areas sort of disparately impacted by this,
Yeah.
right? Because
Well, we can debate this all day long, but the fact is, if we don't get the legislature balanced in Nevada, this is what it's gonna be until we gain control of our legislature, so give me Nevada.
yeah, and again, what I tell people, look, if you really don't like the mail ballot, take them back in, vote in person. We'll destroy the mail ballot. But I think as a country, we're going to have to get a handle on this and really sort of look what we're trying to do with this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's actually extending access all that much. And I think it's causing a lot more mistrust.
Yeah. Well, at least we know. We wouldn't know unless we tried. So that's something to remember. Like, we're not always going to make the right decisions. Government messes up quite a bit, but we learn every time. So that there is something there. Silver lining.
So, if you got some thoughts on this, feel free to shoot us a line at info@775alive.com. Again, September 10th, we're going to both be down in Vegas at the Las Vegas Conservative Town Hall group,
Our next
discussing
episode,
exactly, yeah, next
our
couple
next
episodes.
episode will be in Las Vegas.
Yes, it will.
Nice.
So, we'll be coming to your neck of the woods. Might not have woods, but you get the point. But until then, I'm Scott Gavorski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
We'll see you around the 775.